Hey, it's me, Gold Pikmin. With Security Breach's Ruin DLC around the corner, I think it's time to finally brush myself off after the break I took from theorizing about FNaF 4 months ago, and talk about my own thoughts and expectations for what Ruin will hold. Let me start off my thoughts by addressing the main thing FNaF fans are going on about, so much so that the FNaF wiki apparently changed things to accommodate for it. The Mimic Theory. Respectfully, I think it's bullshit. FNaF fans have a serious problem understanding how relevant the books actually are. A while ago, most people didn't want to touch the books with a 60-foot pole, but after the Mimic story started happening, suddenly everyone was flocking to them as if they were 100% direct objective fact on events within the game timeline, something that a friend of mine has experienced firsthand. Hate to break it to y'all, but that's not how they work. They're meant to show you a set of rules that you're meant to apply to the games and deduce a parallel series of events, not the exact same events. Of course, even if you don't believe me, there's a couple glaring issues with the Mimic Theory that I've only ever seen ID's Fantasy talk about, which, you know, one person in a crowd of people is not a lot. First of all, in the books, the Mimic doesn't even want to be William. It learned deceit and violence from games like Hide and Seek, and the fact that its creator attacked it. Second off, even if the Mimic were to be in the games, traces of William would still have to exist for it to learn from. If Pizzeria Simulator and UCN are truly kaputs for William, there's nothing about him the Mimic can learn from, and would therefore just be making stuff up. William's soul, at the very least, would have to be present in some manner, and given William is more infectious than 1300's bubonic plague, William would likely just take over the Mimic completely anyway. I get it, people are starving for a main villain who's not just William again, but unless the DLC specifically says it's the Mimic in big bold letters, when it comes out next week, William is William. I suppose since I'm going on about characters, I should address the two dwarf elephants in the room, that being Gregory and Cassie. Starting with Gregory, I feel like most people are on the same page at this point, even if they don't like it. That being that Gregory is a robotic copy of somebody, be it the crying child or somebody else, and he was controlled by the glitch trap virus to commit evil actions such as murder and spreading the virus before breaking free somehow, presumably after being possessed by the actual crying child spirit, which then created the events of Security Breach. Now, if you want my honest opinion, I feel like this, or at the very least something very close to this, is what you should expect, and it's what I'm expecting. However, since FNaF has a history of subverting expectations using logic from out of left field, I do have an alternative, though probably very unlikely, explanation. And before I explain it, I want to doubly emphasize that I'm not saying you should expect this, rather, just consider keeping it in your back pocket like you would Cloud in Smash 4. So, what Gregory actually is. A lot of people are saying robot, again, a sentiment I very much agree with, but I do have a secondary unlikely idea. Rockstar Row has a mini-museum full of relics from the company's past, things you would expect like animatronic parts or other things the company would have used for shows. However, in one particular case, there's a random display of the crying child's toys for some reason, with an empty display in the middle that no doubt would house his secret box. Given previous context regarding death in this series and how unceremoniously people treat it, I would say he was likely buried in this box. Now, stepping a different direction for a second, something established in the books specifically to be beautiful is that with Remnant, possibly a little agony, and most likely an illusion disc, you can convince something as basic and primitive as a pile of scrap metal that it's a human being, causing it to walk around and do what humans do, just like we see happen with Sarah after her body parts are replaced by nothing but metal. Now, putting these thoughts together, is it possible Gregory is quite literally the crying child put back together using metal and his remains, but given Remnant, agony, and or illusion disc in order to convince the abomination that it's a completely normal child? Of course, given it's FNaF, it's always possible, but should you actually expect this to be the truth? No, I wouldn't count on it. Like I said, at most just a thought to keep in the back of your mind. Personally, I think I more or less just shoved puzzle pieces together, like you do when solving a puzzle by brute force, and I don't think there's a legitimate reason for this to be the case at all, but I still wanted to share the idea so it could at least be considered, I guess. Moving on from that mess, what about Cassie? Well, given what has been said about Security Breach's infamous post-it note room, especially the idea that both Crying Child and Charlie shared the room, a sentiment I agree with completely, then it only makes sense for Charlie to somehow be funneled into Cassie, right? Cassie is a brown-haired girl who has a lot of very small similarities, such as wearing bracelets and featuring the color green, but the big question is, how would that be possible? Obviously, Fourth Closet's robot duplicates are screaming out at us in this situation, though I'm willing to bet the origin is more akin to what many people assume Gregory's is, that being a robot duplicate of one of Vanny's victims. Perhaps Vanny caught a girl and tried to replace her with Cassie, but Charlie's soul became attached to the machine, brought it to life, and fled with it, resulting in Gregory being Plan B or something like that, whether he be another replacement for another victim or the whole put back together idea. Regardless of what the reasoning is behind either of these characters, I love the thematic storytelling of them being the duo of Crying Child and Charlie. They are the kids of the two feuding founders of Fazbear's who both died in 1983, and the Nightmarian imagery around the Pizzaplex is a combination of their main themes, Charlie being puppet-themed and Crying Child's theme being nightmares. Of course, there's the actual DLC itself and what's gonna be happening. Of course, we don't have a lot to go off of, so this section is ironically very minimal, but from what we know so far, Cassie's going into the Pizzaplex to get Gregory out after he becomes trapped, and along the way, it seems, judging by interactions with Roxy that we have witnessed, that we're going to be hacking into the Glamrocks and freeing them from the virus, as well as rescuing Freddy after he too became trapped. But how exactly are these events gonna play out? Here's my take. Cassie is going to arrive at the Pizzaplex with the goal to free Gregory. However, due to collapsed architecture, a lack of power, and maybe an ambush or two, a lot of paths to where she needs to go no longer work. So Gregory, knowing the layout of the building by this point, tells her about alternate paths she can take throughout the different attractions around the building, much like Freddy did for him during the main game. At some point along the way, Cassie will hit a dead end where she is caught by Roxy, and out of panic, jams her hacking tool into Roxy's eye sockets, and somehow frees Roxy from the glitch trap virus. This results in Cassie figuring out what the virus is, and thus starts a secondary mission to save the band while on her way to Gregory. Of course, even if she manages to set all of them free and rescues Gregory, which she likely will, problems such as Vanny, the Blob, and William in his newest form, possibly formed from Glamrock Bonnie going off of purely visuals, are still present and will likely need to be dealt with before any of them can escape. Now with that being said, I know there's a lot of other topics I could dwell on, but I want to avoid making this longer than it already is, and what I talked about is mostly everything I actually wanted to bother going over. But if you do want to hear more stuff about Ruin, I recommend this video by ID's Fantasy, which I will link in the description. Anyway, I'll see you all another time. Bye everyone!